Okay, so I was looking in the chat box and I could see that a lot of people have picked out kind of the big major difference between these. And the major difference between these tasks is right here. Okay, right there and right here. Now, the reason that I wanted to kind of go over this is because the state of New York is famous for this, and this is their kind of move that I kind of really hate. Um, I'm first of all, I'm going to model every writing task that you get is going to be modeled after the Regents exam, or it's going to come from a Regents exam. So it's going to mirror the things that you will see on the Regents pretty closely. And this is a great example of something that they love to do. The New York State Board of Regents loves to use the letter S. And the reason for that is because it changes how many different what we call aspects there are to the task. When you're given a task, there's a certain number of aspects to that task, meaning that there's a certain number of different things that you need to include in your writing in order to get full credit. So if we kind of go about how this is broken down, the task really tells you how many aspects there are. So when I'm looking here and I'm seeing in this first version and I see discuss the reason this in country engaged in imperialism, that's one aspect. Okay. Discuss the effect of imperialism from the perspective of the people or society taken over and or from the perspective of the conqueror. So as far as a minimum is concerned, pay attention to the words they're using or, okay, or, okay, that's important to know because we need this or this or this. So the minimum number of requirements here as far as aspects is really 2 total. Okay, so this is the important thing that we need to understand. When we go through the same process with the task on the bottom, discuss the reasons this country engaged in imperialism. Reasons is more than one. So as far as aspects that this part of the task is laying out, that's 2. Discuss the effects, plural, of imperialism. Same deal. Or, all the rest of the task is the same. The only difference is these S's. So now this is 2 also. So this means when we read this task down here, the number of aspects in this task is 4. Okay? So you need to include 4 different things in order to get full credit, where up here you only have to include 2. The mistake that a lot of students tend to make is they miss the letter S and they see this task down here and they only write 2 aspects. So this is kind of the reason why I wanted to go over this. This effect becomes compounded when we do this and say, okay, now select 2 and for each discuss this. Now you were 2 short. Now you're going to be 4 aspects short if we make the 2 countries and for each discuss the reasons, right? So if you missed the task in just a second, but in general, this is kind of what we're looking at. Let's see if I can erase all this. I'm sure there's a quicker way to do this, but whatever. Is there? There, haha, yeah. All right, so just some general tips to think about as we start our writing. Number 1, address the bullet points in the task. A lot of times, the bullet points in the task will kind of lean towards, will at least correspond with how many body paragraphs you need. So in the instance of the task we just saw, select one country, we have 2 bullet points. So if it's just one country and there's no letter S, we only really need 2 body paragraphs for this particular writing assignment. Here we kind of need 4, because of the letter S. So you can dedicate, 1 paragraph to each aspect of the task. That's generally a good practice to have. Read the task carefully. Pay attention to each requirement of each bullet point. That's kind of what we just did. Use the rubric as a roadmap. Familiarize yourself with the differences and make sure that you grade yourself after completing the draft. Grade yourself using the rubric. Try to be critical of your work and make adjustments to your writing as needed. Recording here. The first important thing to note about any task is the context. This kind of sets the stage for what you're being asked to do, and it gives you kind of the background that you need to know for the assignment. So, in our made-up assignment here, we're going to pretend it is the year 3000, and you want to research the culture of Newburgh from 2020. So that's, 980 years ago. We're looking back into the past, and we want to know what Newburgh was like almost 1,000 years ago. So your task is as follows. And let's make sure we read the task, carefully and critically to make sure we understand how many aspects there are to the task. So choose one of the social studies professions. So that's for starters. We just went over 6 different social studies professions. So the first thing you're going to have to do is you're going to have to choose one of those. So you can choose archaeologist, economist, sociologist, any of the ones we studied. I leave it totally up to you. I used to assign them, but some are harder than others. So like I said, I'm really just trying to get a feel for your writing styles. So I'm more than happy to let you choose your own. So choose one of the professions that we kind of just went over. And what I want you to do is a couple of different things. One, a thorough description of how that profession studies history and an example of this profession we have studied, including details about the person's accomplishments. So as we kind of think about aspects of the task, a thorough description of how this person studies history is one, right? An example, so that's that's singular. An example of this profession we have studied, that's another one, okay? And including details, plural, letter S, about the person's accomplishments. So that's 2, okay? So far, when we're talking about completing all aspects of this task, we know that for this first bullet point, there are a requirement of 4 different things that we have to do in order to get full credit. So moving on, to the next bullet point, how a person of that profession would research Newburgh in 2020. Where would they go? What specifically would they do? And what kinds of evidence would they hope to examine? And what could they learn from that evidence? So how a person of that profession would research Newburgh in 2020. So that's one. Where would they go? That's another one. What specifically would they do? Okay, that's another one. And what kinds of evidence would they hope to examine? That's another one. Okay, and what could they learn from that evidence? That's another one. Okay, now in this particular class, in this particular case, how a person of that profession would research Newburgh in 2020. Where would they go? What specifically would they do? What kinds of evidence would they hope to examine? And what could they learn from that evidence? All those questions that are included here in this bullet point really speak to this, right? So this is kind of redundant. So, how they do that is entailed in all the other aspects, right? So there's really just 4. If we address these 4 things, 1, 2, 3, 4, okay? This will kind of, satisfy all the requirements. So for this second bullet point, we're really looking at 4 different aspects also, okay? So if we go down here to the rubric, to get a 4, we need to discuss all aspects. That means you need to discuss all 8 of the different things that are required. Now, how you discuss those is really up to you, but if we use the advice that I've kind of laid out for you in previous slides, these 2 bullet points indicate, if you use that as a guideline, this response really only has to be, 2 body paragraphs. I'm not interested in an intro or a conclusion for this particular assignment. So the only thing I really need you to do is write 2 paragraphs. Okay, so I know it may seem a little more daunting than that when we're breaking it down. But in reality, I'm really just asking you guys to write 2 paragraphs. First paragraph on this first bullet point here. Okay, second paragraph on this bullet point here. Okay, so as long as you are addressing both, all of the 8 requirements, you are touching on all aspects of the task. The difference between a 3 and a 4, if we kind of look critically at the rubric, is, all aspects is here in 4, but it's also here in 3 also. So the difference is really, how much detail are you providing, in your explanation. So if your writing is rich in detail, that's more up in the 4 range. But if you discuss all aspects, but really kind of skimp out on the detail and leave a lot of stuff out and just make it really short and sweet, that's more in the 3 range. So make sure you understand the differences in the different scores and how those indicators are different.